Become dangerously expensive. Master yourself, elevate your standards, and become hard to ignore. Published by the Growth Mind Audiobook. Introduction. There is a hidden economy operating inside every human life. You spend something every morning before you earn anything. You spend attention before you make a decision. You spend energy before you produce a result. You spend years before you discover whether the life you built was worth the investment. Most people never study this economy. They spend their best hours on things they will not remember. They give their attention to whoever demands it first. They trade long-term progress for short-term comfort. They tolerate environments that drain them, habits that weaken them, and relationships that repeatedly reduce their sense of self. Then they ask why nobody seems to recognize their value. The harder question is this: have you built something valuable enough for your own behavior to prove it? That is the question behind become dangerously expensive. Expensive here has nothing to do with wealth. It describes a person who has become costly to waste. Their time cannot be casually consumed. Their attention is not available on demand. Their trust is earned rather than assumed. Their standards are visible in their decisions. Their skills produce results. Their presence brings substance. Their absence creates a noticeable gap. And becoming that person does not begin with changing how other people see you. It begins with changing what you repeatedly do when nobody sees you. Get up when you said you would. Finish what you started. Train the skill instead of talking about the talent. Turn off the distraction instead of negotiating with it. Have the difficult conversation instead of rehearsing excuses. Walk away from what repeatedly violates your standards. Stay calm when your emotions demand a reaction. Do the work after the excitement disappears. These moments seem insignificant while you are living them. But they are not insignificant. They are construction materials. Every disciplined decision strengthens your internal structure. Every broken promise weakens it. Every boundary you enforce teaches you that your standards have consequences. Every difficult skill you master increases what you can contribute. Every temptation you refuse strengthens your ability to choose rather than simply react. Eventually, something changes. You stop needing to announce who you are because your behavior has already introduced you. You stop chasing every opportunity because you know what deserves your energy. You stop begging for recognition because you have become too busy developing substance. You stop fearing rejection because rejection can no longer determine your identity. This is not a journey toward arrogance. It is a journey toward self-possession. Become harder to distract, harder to manipulate, harder to discourage, harder to replace, not by becoming inaccessible, but by becoming intentional, not by demanding a higher price, but by increasing what you bring, not by convincing the world that you matter, but by building a life that provides undeniable evidence. Your mission is not to become expensive to others. Your mission is to become so valuable to your own future that you refuse to keep selling it cheaply. Chapter 1. Audit the person you have become. Before you raise your standards, change your environment, or demand a different life, there is a more uncomfortable task waiting for you. Take an honest inventory of yourself, not the version you describe to other people, not the person you imagine becoming someday. Look at the person your repeated choices have already created. Your life is giving you evidence every day. The question is whether you are willing to read it. Most people evaluate themselves through intention. They say they are ambitious because they have ambitious goals. They call themselves disciplined because they admire discipline. They believe they are capable because they know they could do more. But potential is not evidence. A plan sitting in your head cannot compete with a habit repeated for years. If you want to understand who you are becoming, stop listening to your explanations and study your patterns. Look at your calendar. Look at your unfinished projects. Look at the promises you make to yourself and quietly abandon. Look at what you do when nobody is checking. That is where your real identity leaves fingerprints. This is not an invitation to attack yourself. Shame is a poor architect. It destroys without constructing anything better. The purpose of an honest audit is different. You are collecting information so you can make better decisions. Start with your attention. What receives the first and best part of your mind each day? Is it meaningful work, learning, family, health, and creation? Or is it whatever notification appears first? Then examine your time. Where are your hours actually going? The answer may reveal more about your priorities than the goals written in your journal. Next, examine your reactions. What happens when someone disagrees with you? What happens when you are criticized? What happens when progress becomes slow? Your response to discomfort often reveals more than your response to success. Anyone can appear composed when everything is convenient. Character becomes visible when convenience disappears. Then examine your standards. What have you repeatedly tolerated that you secretly resent? Which behaviors do you complain about while continuing to permit them? Where have you said yes because saying no felt uncomfortable? Every repeated tolerance becomes part of the environment you live inside. Now look at your promises. Perhaps the most important relationship you have is the one you maintain with your own word. If you repeatedly tell yourself that you will wake early, exercise, study, build, save, practice, or finish something, and repeatedly abandon those commitments, you are teaching yourself a dangerous lesson. Your own instructions can be ignored. Reverse that lesson. Make fewer promises, but keep them. Choose one small commitment and execute it consistently. Do not make it dramatic. Make it measurable. Finish the task. Complete the workout. Read the pages. Practice the skill. Put the phone away. Go to bed when you said you would. Each completed promise becomes evidence that your decisions have authority. This is how self-trust is built, not through positive statements, but through accumulated proof. Your goal is not to discover that everything about you is perfect. Your goal is to identify the gap between the person you claim to be and the person your behavior currently demonstrates. That gap is not an insult. It is a map. Once you can see it clearly, you can close it deliberately. So begin the audit without excuses and without cruelty. Ask yourself where you are wasting strength, where you are accepting less than you should, where you are avoiding necessary discomfort, and where your daily behavior contradicts your future. Then choose one area and change the evidence. Do not announce the transformation. Begin it. Because the first step toward becoming dangerously expensive is understanding exactly what you have been giving away for free. Chapter 2. Stop renting your identity to other people. There is a quiet form of dependence that rarely looks like dependence. It does not involve money, contracts, or physical chains. It happens when you begin allowing other people's reactions to determine how you feel about yourself. A compliment lifts you. A criticism ruins your day. Someone ignores you, and suddenly you question your worth. Someone approves of you, and you feel powerful again. Without realizing it, you have handed strangers a remote control to your identity. The problem is not that other people's opinions matter. Of course they can matter. We live among people, work with people, love people, and learn from people. The problem begins when their opinions become the final authority on who you are. Imagine building a house and giving every passerby a key to the foundation. One person enters and moves a wall. Another changes the windows. Someone else decides where the doors should go. Eventually, the house no longer reflects the person who built it. That is what happens when your identity is constantly redesigned by outside approval. You become agreeable when you actually disagree. You hide your ambitions because someone might laugh. You change your personality depending on the room. You tolerate disrespect because you fear losing connection. You chase people who have already demonstrated that they do not value your presence. Slowly, you stop asking what you believe and start asking what will make you acceptable. That is an expensive way to live. The first action is simple. Notice when you are performing instead of living. Before making a decision, ask yourself, would I still choose this if nobody knew about it? That question can expose a surprising amount of behavior. If you only pursue something because it looks impressive, you may not actually want it. If you only speak confidently when people agree with you, your confidence is conditional. If you only feel successful when someone acknowledges your success, your definition of success belongs to someone else. Build an internal reference point. Know what you stand for. Decide which principles matter to you. Determine what kind of behavior you respect in yourself. Identify the standards you want to live by, even when nobody rewards you for following them. This gives you something stronger than approval. Direction. You also need to become comfortable being misunderstood. This is one of the hidden prices of independence. When you stop performing for approval, some people may interpret your change incorrectly. They may call you distant when you become selective. They may call you arrogant when you stop over-explaining. They may say you have changed when you simply stop behaving according to their expectations. Let them misunderstand you. Not every misunderstanding requires a defense. There is enormous freedom in realizing that you do not have to correct every opinion about you. Some people will judge you based on incomplete information. Some will compare your chapter 10 to their chapter 1. Some will simply dislike your choices because your choices no longer serve them. You cannot manage all of that without exhausting yourself. Your responsibility is different. Know your character well enough that criticism can teach you without defining you. If someone points out a genuine weakness, examine it. If the criticism is useful, improve. If it is unfair, release it. Either way, remain in control of the conclusion you draw about yourself. Approval should be information, not oxygen. You can appreciate praise without becoming addicted to it. You can hear criticism without collapsing beneath it. You can love people without allowing them to dictate your identity. The goal is not to become indifferent to everyone. The goal is to become anchored enough that you can listen without surrendering yourself. When your identity belongs to you, your decisions become cleaner. You stop chasing every invitation. You stop reshaping yourself for every audience. You stop negotiating your values simply to remain accepted. And that is when something powerful happens. You become harder to manipulate because you no longer need everyone to agree with you. You become harder to control because rejection no longer decides your direction. You become harder to overlook because you finally stop spending your life trying to look acceptable. Take your identity back. You can listen to the world. You can learn from it, but you must remain the person holding the pen. Chapter 3. Create standards that cost you something. A standard is easy to announce when nothing is at stake. You can say you value health, discipline, honesty, peace, excellence, or self-respect. You can describe the kind of life you want in impressive detail. But the real test arrives when keeping those values becomes inconvenient. That is where standards become real. A preference says, I would like this. A standard says, I will organize my behavior around this. The difference is commitment. One expresses desire. The other creates a boundary around your actions. If you say you value your time but give every interruption immediate access to it, your calendar is telling the truth. Your words are avoiding. If you say you want excellence but repeatedly submit work you know is below your ability, your behavior has established a different standard. If you claim to respect yourself while repeatedly accepting treatment that diminishes you, the problem is not that you lack a statement. The problem is that your statement has no consequence. Your standards become powerful when they begin costing you something. Maybe keeping a high standard means leaving a comfortable environment. Maybe it means disappointing someone who has grown accustomed to your availability. Maybe it means waking up earlier, practicing longer, walking away from an easy opportunity, or admitting that something you have been doing for years is no longer good enough. A standard without sacrifice is often just a preference wearing serious language. This is why raising your standards can initially make life feel harder. When you stop accepting everything, you have fewer easy options. When you stop entertaining every distraction, boredom appears. When you stop participating in unnecessary drama, some conversations disappear. When you demand quality from your own work, finishing quickly becomes less important than finishing properly. Do not mistake this temporary discomfort for a mistake. You are not making life harder for the sake of suffering. You are making your choices more intentional. Start by identifying the areas where you have been negotiating with yourself. Perhaps you repeatedly promise to stop wasting your evenings, yet reach for the same distractions every night. Perhaps you know certain relationships drain you, yet continue returning to them because loneliness feels uncomfortable. Perhaps you keep telling yourself that you will take your goals seriously soon. Choose one area. Write down what acceptable behavior looks like, then define what you will no longer repeatedly permit from yourself. The second part is more important. Decide what you will do when the standard becomes inconvenient. That is the moment most standards collapse. Anyone can follow a rule when they are motivated. The real question is what happens when you are tired, frustrated, rejected, bored, or tempted to return to the easier version of yourself. You need predetermined responses. If you value your health, decide what you do on the days you do not feel motivated. If you value your work, establish a minimum amount of focused effort you will complete, even on difficult days. If you value your peace, decide which conversations you will end rather than endlessly repeat. If you value your future, decide which present pleasures you are willing to postpone. Standards should reduce negotiation. They should make certain decisions boring because the answer has already been chosen. This is also where boundaries become different from demands. A demand attempts to control someone else. A boundary controls your participation. You cannot force another person to respect you, but you can decide what you will do when they repeatedly refuse to. That distinction changes everything. You stop waiting for other people to become different before you protect yourself. You stop hoping motivation will rescue your commitments. You stop asking whether you can get away with doing less. Instead, you ask a stronger question. What does the person I claim to be require me to do now? Then do it. Your standards are not decorations for your personality. They are the architecture of your life. They determine what enters, what stays, what leaves, and what you become. So raise them carefully. And once you raise them, pay the price of keeping them. Because every time you refuse to abandon a meaningful standard for temporary comfort, you teach yourself something invaluable. Your word has consequences, and your future can trust you to keep it. Chapter 4. Make yourself harder to distract. Your attention is being auctioned every day. A notification interrupts your thought. A message pulls you away from a task. A short video becomes an hour. Someone else's urgency suddenly becomes your priority. Before you realize what happened, an entire evening has disappeared and you have very little to show for it. The strange part is that distraction rarely feels dangerous while it is happening. It feels harmless. 5 minutes here, 10 minutes there. One quick check, one conversation, one episode, one more scroll. But attention does not disappear in dramatic pieces. It leaks, and what leaks repeatedly eventually becomes a flood. If you want to become difficult to overlook, you first have to become difficult to distract. Your attention is the mechanism through which you build every meaningful part of your life. Skills require attention. Relationships require attention. Thinking requires attention. Creativity requires attention. Recovery requires attention. Even self-awareness requires enough quiet to notice what is happening inside you. Yet many people treat attention as if it belongs to whoever asks for it first. Take it back. Begin by identifying your automatic interruptions. Do not simply blame your phone or the internet. Look at the deeper pattern. What are you trying to escape when you reach for distraction? Boredom, uncertainty, difficult work, loneliness, the fear that you might not be good enough? Sometimes distraction is not a technology problem. It is an avoidance strategy. You may open an app because the task in front of you feels uncomfortable. You may check messages because silence forces you to think. You may consume endless information because producing something yourself feels risky. Once you understand what you are escaping, you can change the behavior at its source. Create friction around your distractions. Move unnecessary apps away from your home screen. Silence non-essential notifications. Keep your phone outside the room when you need concentrated thought. Establish periods when you consume nothing and simply work, walk, read, think, or create. Do not depend entirely on willpower. Design your environment so that the better decision becomes easier. Then give your attention somewhere worthy to go. This matters because removing distraction without replacing it creates a vacuum. If you eliminate entertainment but have no meaningful objective, your mind will eventually search for stimulation again. Choose something that deserves sustained concentration. Learn a difficult subject. Build a project. Improve a professional skill. Write. Read deeply. Practice an instrument. Exercise without constantly checking a screen. Have a conversation without mentally preparing your next notification. The goal is not to become a machine that never relaxes. Rest is not distraction. There is a difference between deliberately recovering and compulsively escaping. A person lying on a sofa after completing meaningful work may be resting. A person who spends 3 hours scrolling while feeling increasingly restless may be avoiding themselves. Both are physically inactive, but psychologically they are doing completely different things. Learn to recognize the difference. You also need to protect your attention from people. Not every message requires an immediate response. Not every argument deserves participation. Not every opinion deserves investigation. Not every opportunity deserves consideration. Availability is not the same as importance. Sometimes the most productive sentence you can say is, "Not now." Your attention becomes valuable when you stop scattering it across everything. Think of it like sunlight. Spread across a wide field, it warms. Concentrated through a lens, it can create enough intensity to transform what it touches. Your mind works similarly. Scattered attention produces activity. Concentrated attention produces capability. So stop measuring your day by how many things you touched. Measure it by what you moved forward. 1 hour of undivided effort can be worth more than an entire day of fragmented busyness. One uninterrupted conversation can strengthen a relationship more than dozens of shallow interactions. One deeply studied idea can change your decisions for years. Protect your attention because your attention eventually becomes your life. Where you repeatedly place your mind, you eventually place your future. And if you want that future to be different, begin with the most immediate resource you possess. Choose what gets your eyes. Choose what gets your ears. Choose what gets your thoughts. Choose what gets your best hours. Do not let the loudest thing in your environment become the most important thing in your life. Become the person who decides where the mind goes. That is the beginning of real focus. And focus is how ordinary potential becomes extraordinary capability. Chapter 5. Turn boredom into an advantage. The world has trained you to expect stimulation before effort. Tap something and it moves. Search something and an answer appears. Swipe once and there is something new. Change the channel and another story begins. Modern life has become exceptionally good at removing the waiting that once surrounded almost everything. But meaningful mastery has not changed. It is still slow, it still repeats itself, it still becomes frustrating, and it still demands that you remain present long after the excitement disappears. That is why boredom can become an advantage. Most people do not quit because a goal is impossible. They quit when the goal becomes ordinary. The beginning feels exciting because everything is new. You imagine the finished result. You picture the recognition. You feel the energy of starting. Then repetition arrives. The same exercise, the same pages, the same mistakes, the same practice, the same difficult problem that refuses to cooperate. This is where many people begin searching for something more interesting. Do not automatically follow them. Boredom is often the entrance fee for depth. When you stay with something after novelty fades, your brain begins moving beyond surface familiarity. You start noticing details you missed before. You recognize patterns. You correct subtle mistakes. You develop judgment. Eventually, an activity that once felt difficult begins to feel natural. That transition is where competence is built. Consider someone learning to play an instrument. The first few days can feel exciting because every sound is new. Weeks later, practicing scales may seem painfully repetitive. Yet those scales are quietly building coordination, timing, control, and precision. The boring work is preparing the musician for expressive work. The same principle applies everywhere. Writing improves through writing. Strength develops through repeated training. Communication improves through deliberate practice. Business ability grows through solving problems. Knowledge deepens through returning to difficult material until the pieces connect. The world celebrates the visible result. It rarely celebrates the repetition that produced it. So learn to value the repetition. This does not mean forcing yourself to remain miserable. There is a difference between productive repetition and pointless persistence. If something has no meaningful purpose, continuing forever is not discipline. But when you know an activity matters and the only problem is that it has become less exciting, do not confuse boredom with a reason to quit. Create a relationship with the ordinary. Set a minimum standard for practice. Make the target small enough that you can execute it consistently, but meaningful enough to create progress. Then protect that commitment from your changing moods. You might read 10 focused pages every day, practice a skill for 30 minutes, write 500 deliberate words, train even when the session feels average, study one difficult concept until you can explain it without notes. The objective is not to create heroic days. It is to create an unbroken relationship with improvement. There will be days when your performance feels brilliant. There will be days when it feels mediocre. Continue anyway. Your emotions are allowed to change. Your commitment does not have to. Boredom also teaches patience, and patience changes your relationship with results. When you become comfortable working without immediate rewards, you stop making every decision according to instant gratification. You become willing to plant things that will take months or years to mature. That is a powerful form of independence. You no longer need constant evidence that your effort is working. You can continue because you understand the process. Eventually, the person who stays becomes the person who knows. They know the subtle details. They understand the difficult moments. They have accumulated mistakes that became lessons. They have developed instincts that cannot be downloaded in an afternoon. That knowledge creates a form of value that is difficult to imitate. So the next time your enthusiasm disappears, do not immediately assume something is wrong. Ask a better question. Have I reached the part where real development begins? If the answer is yes, stay, repeat, refine, return tomorrow. Let other people chase novelty. You will build depth. And while everyone else is searching for something exciting enough to keep them interested, you will quietly become exceptional at something that matters. Chapter 6. Build proof instead of promises. There is a version of confidence that costs nothing. You can tell yourself you are capable, ambitious, disciplined, intelligent, resilient, or destined for something greater. The words may feel powerful for a moment, but words without evidence eventually become another form of entertainment. Real confidence is different. It has a history. It remembers the mornings you got up when you wanted to stay in bed. It remembers the projects you finished after the excitement disappeared. It remembers the difficult conversations you finally had, the skills you practiced when progress was painfully slow, and the moments when you chose your long-term direction over your immediate comfort. That is the kind of confidence you should build. Proof. Most people try to improve their self-image first. They want to feel confident before taking action. They wait until they believe in themselves before attempting something difficult. But confidence rarely arrives before the work. More often, it appears afterward, carrying evidence from the work you completed. You do not have to convince yourself that you are disciplined. Give yourself proof. Choose a commitment and keep it. Then keep it again and again. A single successful day can feel encouraging, but repetition changes the relationship you have with yourself. When you repeatedly do what you said you would do, your mind begins collecting evidence that your decisions have authority. This is especially important when your self-trust has weakened. Maybe you have started many things and finished few. Maybe you have promised yourself change so many times that another promise feels almost meaningless. In that situation, making a larger promise will not solve the problem. Make a smaller promise. Then honor it completely. If you want to become someone who exercises consistently, do not begin by creating an impossible routine. Choose a realistic minimum and execute it. If you want to write, establish a daily amount you can actually complete. If you want to learn, decide exactly when and how long you will study. The size of the commitment matters less than the reliability of the execution. You are rebuilding a relationship with your own word. This principle also changes how you approach goals. Instead of constantly announcing what you are going to accomplish, create visible evidence of progress. Finish the first draft, complete the first course, build the prototype, make the difficult call, publish the work, improve the skill, solve the problem. Evidence has a unique psychological effect. It removes the need for endless internal arguments. When you have repeatedly demonstrated that you can do something, doubt may still appear, but it no longer has complete authority. You have receipts. This is why private victories matter so much. Nobody may congratulate you for closing your laptop instead of scrolling for another hour. Nobody may know that you practiced when you were exhausted. Nobody may see you choosing patience instead of reacting emotionally. Keep doing it anyway. Some of the most valuable proof you will ever collect will never be posted, photographed, or praised. It will exist only between you and the person you are becoming. There is another advantage to building proof. It changes how other people experience you. When your words are repeatedly supported by action, people stop treating your promises as predictions. They begin treating them as signals of what is likely to happen. That creates trust. And trust is one of the most powerful forms of personal value. You do not need to be perfect to become trustworthy. You need to become consistent enough that people can reasonably depend on your behavior. So stop spending so much energy explaining what you are capable of. demonstrate it. If you want respect, become dependable. If you want confidence, accumulate difficult victories. If you want authority, become competent. If you want to be taken seriously, take your own commitments seriously first. Let your results become your introduction. Let your consistency become your reputation. Let your behavior become the evidence that your words deserve attention. The person who constantly announces what they will do remains trapped in the future tense. The person who quietly does the work begins living in proof. And proof has a language of its own. It does not need to shout. It simply remains visible. Chapter 7. Learn to carry pressure without leaking it. Pressure does not always announce itself. Sometimes it arrives as a difficult conversation. Sometimes as an unexpected failure, a deadline, a financial setback, a rejection, or a decision you wish you could postpone. Sometimes it appears when several ordinary problems arrive at the same time, and suddenly your patience feels smaller than your responsibilities. In those moments, you discover something important about yourself. Pressure does not necessarily create your behavior. It reveals the behavior you have trained. Anyone can appear composed when everything is moving according to plan. The deeper test comes when the plan breaks, when someone challenges you, when an opportunity disappears, when you make a mistake in front of other people, when uncertainty stretches longer than your patience can comfortably handle. This is where emotional discipline becomes valuable. Emotional discipline does not mean becoming emotionless. It means refusing to hand every emotion the authority to make decisions for you. You can feel anger without sending the message. You can feel fear without abandoning the goal. You can feel disappointment without destroying the relationship. You can feel embarrassment without shrinking your identity. The space between feeling and acting is where self-command lives. Most destructive reactions happen because that space is too small. Something happens, an emotion rises, and behavior follows immediately. A harsh sentence is spoken, a decision is made, a relationship is damaged, an opportunity is abandoned. Then the emotion disappears, but the consequences remain. Create a pause. When pressure rises, slow the sequence down. Take a breath. Leave the room if necessary. Write the response before sending it. Ask what outcome you actually want. Give yourself enough distance to distinguish between what you feel right now and what you will still believe tomorrow. A useful question is, if I act from this emotion, what will it cost me later? That question can interrupt an enormous amount of unnecessary damage. Pressure also becomes easier to carry when you stop treating discomfort as an emergency. Not every uncomfortable feeling requires immediate relief. Sometimes anxiety simply means you are facing uncertainty. Sometimes frustration means progress is taking longer than expected. Sometimes fear appears because something matters. You do not have to eliminate these feelings. You have to learn that you can experience them without becoming their servant. Think of emotional control as carrying a full glass while walking through a crowded room. The objective is not to pretend the glass is empty. You know it is full. You simply move carefully because you understand that one careless movement can spill everything. Your internal state deserves the same awareness. Watch your triggers. Notice the situations that repeatedly pull you into impulsive behavior. Perhaps criticism makes you defensive. Perhaps being ignored makes you chase harder. Perhaps uncertainty makes you overthink. Perhaps disrespect makes you immediately retaliate. Once you know your triggers, you can prepare for them. Preparation turns surprise into practice. You can decide in advance that you will not respond to serious criticism while angry. You can choose to wait before making major decisions. You can establish rules for yourself when exhausted or emotionally overwhelmed. This is not weakness. It is intelligent self-management. There is also power in learning to absorb pressure without transferring it to everyone around you. A difficult day does not give you permission to become difficult for everyone else. If you are frustrated at work, you do not need to punish your family. If someone disappoints you, you do not need to become cruel to the next person you meet. Your emotional state is yours to manage. That does not mean suppressing it. It means processing it without turning it into collateral damage. The strongest people are not those who never become shaken. They are the ones who know how to return to center. They can be disappointed and continue. They can be criticized and examine the criticism. They can fail and begin again. They can become angry and still choose their words. They can face uncertainty without demanding immediate answers. That kind of steadiness creates trust. People know what to expect from someone who does not become a different person every time circumstances change. And you begin trusting yourself too. You discover that difficult emotions can pass without controlling your direction. So when pressure arrives, do not ask, "How do I make this feeling disappear?" Ask, "How do I carry this without allowing it to decide who I become?" Then slow down, breathe, think, choose. Because composure is not the absence of pressure. It is the ability to remain yourself while pressure is present. Chapter 8. Become selective with your yes. Every time you say yes, you quietly spend something. You spend an hour that cannot be repeated. You spend attention that could have strengthened a skill. You spend emotional energy that could have protected your peace. The problem is that most people only notice the cost of a bad decision after the payment has already been made. They agree to meetings they never wanted to attend. They keep conversations alive long after they have stopped adding value. They accept responsibilities simply because refusing feels uncomfortable. They become available to everyone, then wonder why they have nothing left for themselves. This chapter is not about saying no to everything. It is about making your yes valuable again. Imagine your life as a room with limited chairs. Every commitment occupies one. Every obligation sits down. Every distraction takes a seat. Eventually, something important arrives, a meaningful opportunity, a creative project, a relationship that deserves your full attention, but there is nowhere left for it to sit because your room is already crowded with things that should have left long ago. Your first responsibility is not to fill the room, it is to protect it. Many people confuse generosity with unlimited access. They believe being helpful requires constant availability, but there is a difference between serving others and abandoning yourself. A person who never protects their own energy eventually becomes too exhausted to offer their best to anyone. Learn to pause before agreeing. Instead of answering immediately, create space. A simple phrase like, "Let me think about it," gives you something incredibly valuable. The chance to make a decision instead of an emotional reaction. Then ask 3 questions. Does this move me toward the person I am becoming? Does it deserve my best energy? What am I saying no to by saying yes? The third question changes everything. Every yes automatically creates a hidden no. If you spend your evening on unnecessary obligations, you say no to recovery. If you spend your morning reacting to messages, you say no to focused work. If you keep rescuing people from problems they refuse to solve themselves, you may be saying no to your own growth. Opportunity cost is not just an economic idea, it is a life principle. Your future is shaped as much by the commitments you decline as by the ones you accept. This also applies to relationships. Notice who consistently leaves you clearer, stronger, and more grounded after spending time together. Notice who leaves you emotionally drained, anxious, or constantly proving yourself. Your life often reflects the quality of the conversations you repeatedly allow into it. Being selective is not about judging people, it is about protecting direction. There will be moments when saying no feels uncomfortable. Someone may expect immediate access to your time. Someone may pressure you to abandon your priorities. Someone may interpret your boundaries as rejection. Accept that discomfort. A temporary misunderstanding is often less expensive than a permanent pattern of self-neglect. You do not need a dramatic explanation for every boundary. Mature decisions rarely require theatrical speeches. Sometimes a respectful, direct answer is enough. The more comfortable you become with clear communication, the less likely you are to over-explain your choices. There is another benefit to becoming selective. When you stop saying yes automatically, your commitments become stronger. People begin trusting your word because they know you are not agreeing out of guilt. When you commit, you mean it. When you show up, you are fully present. Your reliability increases because your promises become intentional instead of impulsive. This creates a quiet form of credibility. You become someone whose calendar reflects priorities rather than pressure. Your attention becomes deeper because it is no longer divided across countless unnecessary obligations. Your relationships improve because the time you give becomes genuine instead of reluctant. Remember this principle. Do not ask whether you have enough time. Ask whether this deserves the life you are exchanging for it. Time is not measured only in hours. It is measured in focus, energy, opportunity, and presence. Spend those resources deliberately, protect your yes, respect your no, and build a life where your commitments reflect your highest standards instead of your fear of disappointing everyone else. Because becoming dangerously expensive begins with one powerful decision. Not everything deserves access to the best of you. Chapter 9. Leave what requires you to betray yourself. There are places you outgrow long before you have the courage to admit it. There are conversations that repeatedly leave you smaller. There are relationships that survive only because you keep lowering your expectations. There are environments where your potential is tolerated as long as it does not challenge anyone. Eventually, you face a difficult question. What are you continuing to hold on to simply because leaving feels harder? Growth is not always about adding something new. Sometimes it requires removing what has been quietly training you to accept less. A boundary is not a weapon. It is a decision about where you will place your participation. You cannot control another person's behavior, but you can control whether you continue volunteering for the same pattern. That distinction is one of the clearest signs of maturity. Suppose someone repeatedly disrespects you. You explain yourself. They apologize. The pattern returns. You explain again. The cycle continues. At some point, another explanation may not be the solution. The solution may be changing your access, your distance, or your involvement. This is where many people hesitate. They confuse leaving with failure. They believe staying proves loyalty. They believe enduring everything makes them strong. They worry that walking away means they were not patient enough, forgiving enough, or committed enough. But endurance is not automatically strength. Sometimes endurance is simply fear wearing the costume of loyalty. You can remain loyal to a person without remaining loyal to a destructive pattern. You can forgive someone without giving them unlimited access to you. You can care about someone and still decide that the relationship no longer belongs in its previous form. The same principle applies beyond relationships. Perhaps you have a habit that repeatedly steals your evenings. Perhaps you work in an environment that rewards behavior completely opposite to your values. Perhaps you keep pursuing a goal because you have already invested so much time in it, even though the direction no longer makes sense. Ask yourself what continuing costs, not just financially. What does it cost your attention, your confidence, your health, your creativity, your relationships, your ability to respect yourself? People often calculate the price of leaving while ignoring the price of staying. Both have a cost. Leaving can produce uncertainty. Staying can produce stagnation. Leaving may create temporary loneliness. Staying may create permanent self-betrayal. Leaving may disappoint someone. Staying may disappoint the person you could have become. This does not mean you should abandon everything whenever life becomes uncomfortable. Growth itself is uncomfortable. Difficult conversations can be worth having. Relationships can require patience. Careers can have seasons of frustration. You must learn the difference between something that is difficult because it is valuable and something that is destructive because it repeatedly violates your core standards. Look for patterns. One bad day is not always a warning. A repeated pattern is information. If you have communicated clearly, attempted reasonable solutions, taken responsibility for your part, and the same harmful cycle continues, you have learned something important. Believe the pattern. You also need to stop waiting for perfect closure. Sometimes you will never receive the apology you wanted. Sometimes the other person will never understand why you left. Sometimes the explanation you hoped would make everything make sense will never arrive. You may have to create your own closure by accepting reality. That acceptance can be quiet. No dramatic announcement, no public revenge, no attempt to make someone regret losing you, simply a decision to stop participating. This is where walking away becomes powerful. You are no longer negotiating your self-respect against someone else's willingness to change. You are choosing alignment, and alignment creates energy. When your environment stops constantly fighting your values, you have more strength available for building. You can think more clearly, work more deeply, rest without guilt, develop relationships that do not require constant self-abandonment. The goal is not to make yourself unreachable. The goal is to stop making yourself available to what repeatedly diminishes you. There will always be things you cannot control, but you can choose what receives your continued participation. So examine your life honestly. Where are you staying because you are afraid to leave? Where are you tolerating what you already know you cannot respect? Where have you mistaken endurance for strength? Then make the necessary decision. Sometimes the most valuable thing you can add to your life is not another opportunity, relationship, habit, or goal. Sometimes it is an exit. Because when you stop betraying yourself to preserve what no longer fits, you create room for the person you are becoming. Chapter 10. Develop an ability people can feel. There is a difference between looking capable and being useful. One depends heavily on presentation, the other becomes obvious when something difficult needs to be solved. A polished image may attract attention, but capability creates reasons for people to remember you. This is where your personal value begins moving beyond appearance. You can improve your confidence, your communication, your style, and your presence, but eventually the question becomes unavoidable. What can you actually do well? Not what do you want to learn? Not what could you become? Not what sounds impressive when you describe it? What can you reliably produce? That question changes the game. A valuable ability is not merely something you know. It is something you can apply. Knowledge becomes powerful when it helps you make a decision, solve a problem, create something useful, improve a process, communicate an important idea, or make another person's life easier. Think about the people you naturally trust in difficult situations. You probably do not trust them simply because they are confident. You trust them because you have seen them operate. They know what they are doing. They remain useful when conditions become complicated. They can look at a problem without immediately becoming overwhelmed. That kind of capability is built. Begin by choosing an ability worth developing. Do not choose it simply because it sounds prestigious. Choose something that connects to the kind of life and contribution you want to create. It might be writing, analysis, leadership, programming, sales, design, teaching, negotiation, communication, research, craftsmanship, or another practical discipline. Then go deeper than casual familiarity. The modern world makes it easy to feel knowledgeable without becoming competent. You can watch hundreds of videos, save dozens of articles, listen to podcasts, and collect notes without ever producing anything. Consumption creates the feeling of progress. Application creates progress. So shorten the distance between learning and doing. If you study writing, write. If you study communication, communicate. If you study leadership, take responsibility for something. If you study business, solve a real problem. If you study a technical skill, build something that can fail and force you to improve. Your mistakes are not interruptions to learning. They are part of learning. Every error exposes a gap between what you understand and what you can execute. That gap is valuable because now you know where to train. This is why feedback matters. Do not protect yourself from every indication that you are not yet excellent. Find environments where your work can be tested. Ask better questions. Invite honest criticism. Compare your output with a higher standard. Study people who are better than you without turning admiration into insecurity. Your ego may prefer praise. Your development needs information. You also need patience. Rare competence does not appear after a few enthusiastic weeks. It develops through accumulated exposure, repeated correction, and increasingly difficult challenges. At first, you will need conscious effort for things that eventually become instinctive. That is normal. Stay with it. Over time, your ability begins changing how you move through the world. Problems that once looked intimidating become familiar. You recognize patterns faster. You ask better questions. You waste less effort. You know what matters and what does not. That is when people begin to feel your capability without you announcing it. You become the person who can be handed a complicated problem and trusted to work through it. But there is another layer. Do not develop skills merely to become impressive. Develop them to become useful. The most powerful form of expertise is not, "Look what I know." It is, "Give me the problem. Let me see what I can do." That attitude changes your relationship with value. You stop measuring yourself by how much attention you receive and start measuring yourself by how much meaningful value you can create. You become less dependent on image because competence gives you substance beneath the image. So choose your craft, study it, practice it, apply it, break things, repair them, seek feedback, repeat, then keep going after the novelty disappears. One day, you will notice that something has changed. People will begin asking for your judgment. They will seek your help. They will trust your ability. They will remember you when a difficult problem appears, not because you demanded importance, because you developed something useful enough to matter. That is real value, and once you possess it, no amount of self-promotion is necessary to make it visible. Chapter 11. Become predictably excellent. Talent attracts attention, but consistency creates trust. A person may impress you once with an extraordinary performance, yet the person you rely on is usually the one who keeps delivering when the excitement has disappeared. That distinction matters. Anyone can have a remarkable day. Fewer people can produce quality on an ordinary Tuesday when they are tired, distracted, frustrated, or simply not inspired. Predictable excellence is not about performing perfectly every time. It is about becoming dependable enough that your standards remain visible even when circumstances are not ideal. Think about the difference between a person who occasionally makes impressive promises and someone whose word has become almost boringly reliable. When the second person says something will be done, you do not need a dramatic explanation. You simply expect movement. That expectation is earned. It begins with something simple. Stop making commitments you have no intention of honoring. Every unnecessary promise weakens your credibility. Every exaggerated claim creates expectations you may struggle to meet. Every deadline you casually give and repeatedly miss teaches people to discount your word. So become more deliberate with what you promise. Say less. commit carefully, then execute. Reliability is built through repetition, not intensity. You do not become dependable because you succeeded once under perfect conditions. You become dependable because your behavior remains recognizable across different conditions. When you are tired, you still handle what matters. When nobody praises you, you still maintain the standard. When the task becomes boring, you still finish it. When something goes wrong, you communicate instead of disappearing. When you make a mistake, you correct it instead of constructing an elaborate excuse. These behaviors may not look spectacular, but together they create something powerful: trust. And trust is difficult to manufacture quickly. People remember patterns. They remember who showed up when things became complicated. They remember who remained calm when everyone else became reactive. They remember who completed the difficult part instead of disappearing when the excitement ended. Your reputation is essentially a collection of these memories. That means your reputation is being built whether you are paying attention to it or not. Every interaction leaves a small piece of evidence. The way you answer a difficult question, the way you handle a missed deadline, the way you treat someone who cannot benefit you, the way you respond when your contribution is criticized, the way you behave after receiving praise. These moments reveal whether your standards are real or merely performative. Predictable excellence also requires systems. Do not expect yourself to remember everything through sheer willpower. Use calendars, checklists, routines, preparation, and clear processes. Reduce the number of decisions that must be made repeatedly. Professionalism often looks like discipline, but underneath it is frequently good preparation. The person who arrives prepared appears calm because they removed unnecessary uncertainty before the situation began. The person who consistently produces quality usually does not rely on inspiration. They have developed a process that makes quality more likely. Build that process. Before important work, prepare. During the work, focus. Afterward, review. Ask what worked, what failed, and what should change next time. This turns experience into improvement. There is also an important distinction between excellence and perfectionism. Perfectionism can make you afraid to finish. Excellence demands that you care deeply about the result while still understanding that completion, feedback, and iteration are necessary. Do the work, release it, learn, improve, repeat. Your goal is not to create a reputation for never making mistakes. That reputation is impossible. Create a reputation for responding well to mistakes. When something breaks, become the person who moves toward the problem. When something is unclear, ask. When something goes wrong, take responsibility for your part. When someone depends on you, respect the dependency. This is how ordinary reliability becomes extraordinary value. Eventually, people stop needing to wonder whether you will follow through. Your consistency answers for you, and that is a powerful position to occupy. You no longer need to convince people that you are serious. Your history has already made the argument, so make your behavior predictable in the best possible way. Let people know that your word means something. Let your preparation create calm. Let your consistency create trust. Let your work create reputation, because the most valuable person is not necessarily the person who shines the brightest once. It is often the person whose light can be counted on to remain there when everyone else disappears. Or Chapter 12. Make rejection pay you back. Rejection has a peculiar way of making a temporary event feel like a permanent verdict. One unanswered message becomes, "Nobody wants me." One failed interview becomes, "I am not good enough." One opportunity disappears, and suddenly the entire future you imagined seems to disappear with it. But rejection is not always a judgment of your worth. Sometimes it is information, sometimes it is timing, sometimes it is incompatibility, sometimes it is a signal that your approach needs work, and sometimes it is simply a door that was never going to open. The danger is not rejection itself. The danger is allowing rejection to become an identity. When that happens, you stop examining what happened and start protecting yourself from ever experiencing it again. You stop applying, you stop creating, you stop speaking, you stop asking. You choose the safety of invisibility over the possibility of being refused. That is an expensive trade. If you want to become difficult to overlook, you must become capable of hearing no without allowing it to rewrite your understanding of yourself. Start by separating the event from the story. The event might be simple: you were not selected, someone disagreed with you, a project failed, a relationship ended, or an opportunity went elsewhere. The story is what your mind adds afterward. I am a failure. I will never get another chance. They must think I am worthless. Those conclusions may feel convincing, but feelings are not always accurate analysts. Return to the facts. What actually happened? What part was outside your control? What part was within your control? What information can you extract? These questions turn rejection from an emotional wall into a source of data. Perhaps your preparation was weak. Good. Now you know what to strengthen. Perhaps your communication was unclear. Good. You have something specific to practice. Perhaps another candidate was simply a better fit. Accept it. Perhaps the opportunity was never aligned with what you genuinely wanted. Learn that too. Not every rejection requires self-improvement. Sometimes the correct response is simply acceptance. This distinction matters because endless self-criticism is not growth. If you assume every closed door proves you are defective, you will eventually become afraid to knock. The objective is not to blame yourself for everything. It is to take responsibility for what belongs to you and release what does not. You can also change the way you measure failure. Instead of asking, "Did I get what I wanted?" ask, "Did I become better equipped for the next attempt?" That question keeps your development alive. A rejection can improve your judgment. It can expose unrealistic expectations. It can reveal a weakness in preparation. It can teach patience. It can force you to develop another skill. It can redirect you toward an opportunity you would never have considered otherwise. That is how rejection begins paying you back. You extract something useful from the experience. Think about a person learning to ride a bicycle. Falling is not proof that cycling is impossible. It is feedback about balance. The fall becomes useful when the rider adjusts, rather than lying on the ground and declaring the entire experiment a failure. Life works similarly. You need enough emotional strength to stand up without pretending the fall did not hurt. There is no virtue in pretending rejection feels wonderful. It can hurt deeply. Let yourself acknowledge that. But do not build a permanent home inside the disappointment. Feel it, study it, use it, move. Another important lesson is to stop chasing people who have already communicated their answer. Repeatedly trying to force acceptance rarely creates dignity. Sometimes the strongest response to rejection is not another attempt to convince someone. It is redirecting your effort toward a place where your contribution can actually grow. Your value does not become smaller because one person failed to recognize it, but neither should rejection become an excuse to avoid honest improvement. Hold both truths. You have value, and you still have work to do. That combination creates maturity. So when rejection arrives, resist the instinct to ask, "What is wrong with me?" Ask better questions. What did this reveal? What can I improve? What should I release? What direction is now available to me? Then make the experience useful. Let rejection sharpen your judgment instead of shrinking your ambition. Let failure teach you instead of naming you. Let closed doors redirect your energy instead of destroying it, because the strongest response to rejection is not proving someone wrong. It is becoming so much wiser, stronger, and more capable that the rejection becomes one small event in a much larger story. Chapter 13. Build a life that makes desperation impossible. Desperation rarely arrives all at once. It grows quietly when too much of your identity becomes dependent on one person, one opportunity, one source of income, one social circle, or one version of the future. When that happens, losing one thing can feel like losing everything. You begin accepting conditions you would normally reject. You stay in conversations that exhaust you. You chase people who have already made their position clear. You tolerate situations that contradict your standards because the alternative feels frightening. The problem is not caring deeply. The problem is having nowhere else to stand. Independence begins by building a life with more than one pillar. This does not mean becoming detached from people or pretending you need nobody. Human beings need relationships, community, cooperation, and connection. Real strength is not isolation. It is knowing that love and dependence do not have to mean surrendering your entire identity. Build something that belongs to you. Develop your mind. Develop your skills. Create meaningful work. Take care of your body. Learn to enjoy your own company. Maintain relationships that make you stronger rather than smaller. Have interests that exist outside your career. Create goals that are not dependent on someone else's approval. The objective is to make your life wider. A narrow life creates desperation because every emotional investment becomes oversized. If your entire identity is your job, a career setback feels like an identity crisis. If your entire identity is a relationship, conflict feels like personal extinction. If your entire identity is social approval, being excluded feels like disappearing. But when your life contains several meaningful dimensions, one disappointment does not erase the whole structure. Think of a bridge supported by multiple foundations. If one support weakens, the entire bridge does not immediately collapse. Your life should have the same resilience. This is why solitude can be valuable, not loneliness. Solitude. Learn to spend time with yourself without immediately reaching for stimulation or another person's attention. Sit with your thoughts. Walk without constantly consuming something. Read, reflect. Work on something simply because it matters to you. When you become comfortable in your own company, you become less likely to accept poor company simply because silence feels uncomfortable. That changes relationships. You stop asking, will this person stay? You begin asking, does this relationship belong in the life I am building? That is a completely different question. The same principle applies to opportunities. If one opportunity becomes your only hope, you may negotiate against yourself. You might accept unfair conditions because you believe nothing else will appear. Build capability instead. The more useful you become, the more options you create. Skills create options. Knowledge creates options. Relationships create options. Savings and responsible planning can create options. A strong reputation can create options. Options reduce desperation, and reduced desperation improves decision-making. When you are not terrified of losing one particular outcome, you can negotiate more honestly. You can walk away when necessary. You can wait for a better fit. You can say no without feeling that your entire future has disappeared. But independence should never become an excuse for refusing help. Strong people still ask for assistance. They still depend on others in healthy ways. They still collaborate. The difference is that they do not surrender their entire sense of self in exchange for support. They can receive without becoming owned by what they receive. They can love without disappearing inside the relationship. They can cooperate without abandoning judgment. They can lose something meaningful and still know who they are. That is the deeper form of security. So look at your life and ask a difficult question. If one major thing disappeared tomorrow, would I still have a reason to stand up the next morning? If the answer feels uncertain, do not panic. Build. Develop another skill. Strengthen another relationship. Create another purpose, explore another interest, become more capable, make your inner world larger. You are not trying to create a life where nothing can hurt you. That life does not exist. You are creating a life where loss does not automatically become destruction. The goal is freedom from desperate bargaining. When you know you can rebuild, you stop begging life to preserve everything exactly as it is. You become calmer, more selective, more courageous, and strangely enough more generous because you no longer need every interaction to secure your survival or identity. Build a life with enough depth that you can love what you have without being terrified of losing it. That is real independence. And when you reach that point, your choices stop being driven by fear. They begin being driven by purpose. Chapter 14. Become the standard you once searched for. At some point, the search has to end. You can spend years looking for the right mentor, the perfect opportunity, the ideal relationship, the person who finally understands you, the environment that motivates you, or the moment when everything suddenly becomes easier. But there is a limit to how far searching can take you. Eventually, you have to become what you have been looking for. If you wanted someone who kept their word, become that person. If you admired people who remained calm under pressure, train yourself to become calm. If you wished someone would believe in your potential, start investing enough effort into yourself that your own belief has evidence behind it. This is the final shift in the journey. You stop waiting for external circumstances to give you permission. You take responsibility for the construction. That does not mean pretending you can control everything. You cannot control who chooses you, what opportunities appear, how other people behave, or whether life gives you fair conditions. But you can influence what you bring into those conditions. You can decide how seriously you treat your commitments. You can decide whether disappointment makes you wiser or bitter. You can decide whether criticism becomes information or an attack on your identity. You can decide what receives your attention, what earns your trust, and what no longer deserves your participation. These decisions create standards, and standards create identity. Think back to where this journey began. You were asked to examine your actual behavior instead of your imagined potential. You learned to stop renting your identity to other people's opinions. You raised standards high enough that maintaining them required sacrifice. You protected your attention. You learned to stay through boredom, build evidence, manage pressure, choose your commitments, leave what repeatedly diminished you, develop useful abilities, become dependable, and turn rejection into information. None of these lessons exists separately. They reinforce one another. When you protect your attention, you create room for skill. When you develop skill, you create capability. When you become capable, you gain confidence grounded in evidence. When you trust yourself, you become less dependent on approval. When you stop depending on approval, you can enforce better boundaries. When your boundaries become stronger, your time becomes more intentional. When your time becomes intentional, your life begins reflecting your standards. That is how identity changes, not in one dramatic moment, through thousands of ordinary decisions that eventually become difficult to distinguish from your character. This is why becoming dangerously expensive should never mean becoming arrogant. Arrogance says, "I am better than you." Self-possession says, "I know what I am responsible for." Arrogance needs an audience. Self-possession does not. You do not need to make people feel small to become strong. You do not need to manipulate scarcity. You do not need to pretend you are too important to care. Become valuable through contribution. Become respected through consistency. Become confident through evidence. Become selective through clarity. Become strong through responsibility. And become independent enough that you can choose connection without needing it to prove your worth. There will still be days when you doubt yourself. There will still be failures. There will still be people who misunderstand you. There will still be moments when the old version of you tries to return because it feels familiar. Do not interpret those moments as proof that you have failed. Growth does not erase your old patterns overnight. It gives you the ability to recognize them sooner and choose differently. That is progress. You are not trying to become a flawless human being. You are becoming a person whose direction is stronger than their impulses, a person who can make a mistake without turning the mistake into an identity, a person who can lose without becoming lost, a person who can succeed without becoming dependent on applause, a person who can walk away without needing revenge, a person who can stay when something meaningful requires patience, a person who knows what deserves their best. So stop searching for the person who will finally make you feel valuable. Become someone you can respect when the room is empty. Become the mentor you needed. Become the discipline you admired. Become the standard you kept waiting for other people to demonstrate. And remember the deepest lesson of this entire journey. You do not become difficult to replace by making yourself unavailable. You become difficult to replace by becoming genuinely valuable. Build substance, build character, build capability, build judgment, build a life you respect. Then let your actions speak. Because when you finally become the person you once searched for, you discover something extraordinary. You were never waiting for permission to begin. You were waiting for yourself to decide. Conclusion: become too valuable to ignore. You have reached the end of this audiobook, but the real work begins when the narration stops. The idea of becoming dangerously expensive was never about creating an image of superiority. It was about becoming so intentional with your life that your time, attention, abilities, standards, and character are no longer treated as disposable, even by you. You began by examining the person your habits were creating. Then you learned to reclaim your identity from outside approval, establish standards that require action, protect your attention, tolerate the boredom that accompanies mastery, and replace empty promises with evidence. You learned to carry pressure without allowing emotion to control your decisions. You became more selective with your commitments. You learned that sometimes growth requires an exit, that rejection can become information, and that real independence comes from building a life with enough depth that one setback cannot destroy your direction. You also discovered something essential. Value is not announced, it is demonstrated. Your skills demonstrate it. Your reliability demonstrates it. Your decisions demonstrate it. Your boundaries demonstrate it. Your ability to remain composed when circumstances become difficult demonstrates it. Most importantly, the way you behave when nobody is watching demonstrates it. So do not finish this audiobook feeling inspired and then return to exactly the same routines. Turn the ideas into behavior. Choose one standard and enforce it today. Remove one distraction. Finish one task you have been avoiding. Protect one block of focused time. Practice one valuable skill. Say one necessary no. Keep one promise you made to yourself. Then repeat. You do not need a dramatic reinvention. You need enough disciplined decisions to make your old patterns increasingly unfamiliar. Remember, becoming valuable does not mean becoming unavailable. It does not mean becoming cold, arrogant, or obsessed with proving your importance. It means becoming grounded enough to know what deserves your energy and capable enough to contribute something meaningful when you give it. Do not chase the appearance of being important. Become useful. Do not demand respect. Become trustworthy. Do not beg to be noticed. Build substance. Do not fear being replaced. Keep developing. And do not spend your life asking whether other people recognize your worth. Ask whether your daily actions are worthy of the future you say you want. That question can change everything. Your life is still being built. Your standards can rise. Your skills can deepen. Your discipline can strengthen. Your character can mature. Your direction can become clearer. So leave this audiobook with one final decision. Stop selling your future for temporary comfort. Protect what matters. Build what lasts. Become someone whose presence carries weight because it contains something real. And when the world finally notices, you will not need to explain your value. Your life will already have done it for you.